This program is a presentation of UCTV for educational and non-commercial use only.
I'm Nancy Adler, and it's both my pleasure, it's a bittersweet pleasure to be hosting this with Judy Moskowitz and to welcome everyone to this symposium in honor of Susan Falkman. Judy and I had actually great fun in planning this, in no small part because of the incredible response we got when we sort of put this idea out. It was gratifying how many people wanted to come, and we have people here, when I'd first written my remarks, I was saying from all over the country, but really from all over the world. People have come from far and wide to honor Susan. Susan's announcement of her intended retirement actually set up a perfect laboratory for studying stress and coping. The situation was clearly devastating. Losing Susan's wisdom, insight, humor, uncommon good sense, and calming influence affected us all. We tried problem-solving coping, but Susan didn't cooperate. She was clear that she had some ideas of things she wanted to do, and we weren't going to change the situation. So we moved to emotion-focused coping. The first thing we tried was denial, and that didn't work too well because Susan kept reminding us she really was going to retire. Then we tried reframing, and we focused on the opportunities to get together in new ways. However, nothing beats the day in, day out interaction we have with Susan and the closeness we have with her here. She is one of the most influential thinkers in psychology. Her seminal work with Richard Lazarus, Stress, Appraisal, and Coping, provided a strong foundation for the wide-ranging research on stress and coping that has followed. It's been cited over 13,600 times, a daunting figure. She's made specific contributions, including showing that coping is a process, not an outcome, differentiating problem-focused versus emotion-focused coping, and developing a measure to assess coping. The Ways of Coping questionnaire, based on her dissertation, is the most widely used coping measure in psychology. It's been translated into more than 20 languages. The symposium today focuses primarily on Susan's scientific contributions. So you'll see the panels are organized around the conceptual issues I've just described. But we also want to celebrate Susan's institution building work. And for that, I'm going to turn this over to Judy Moskowitz.
So I want to just say a little bit about Susan's work here at the Osher Center. One of the fundamental questions that sparked Susan's research and continues to drive it is how people undergoing significant stress manage to maintain their psychological and physical well-being. In 1988, Susan moved to the Center for AIDS Prevention Studies here at UCSF and began applying stress and coping theory to a study of men caring for their partners with AIDS. This was prior to the advent of effective therapies for HIV, and a large proportion of the people with AIDS died. So the UCSF Coping Project, as it was called, became a study of coping with caregiving and bereavement. That project remains one of the most influential caregiving and bereavement studies ever conducted. While at CAPS, Susan also worked with Margaret Chesney, who's here. I saw you, Margaret, there you are, to design one of the first stress reduction interventions based on stress and coping theory, coping effectiveness training, which has become the core of a burgeoning number of stress reduction interventions, particularly for people coping with HIV and other serious chronic stressors. Based on the findings from the UCSF Coping Project, in 1997, Susan revised stress and coping theory to highlight the adaptive functions of positive emotion in the coping process. The key finding that people experience positive emotion even in the midst of distress spurred a whole new generation of research into the adaptive functions of positive emotion in the context of stress. In 2001, Susan became the director of the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine here at UCSF, further extending her work into the area of mind-body medicine. With Rick Hecht and our colleagues, she has led a study about the extent to which mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR, can delay progression of HIV. Throughout her career, Susan has been a champion for social scientists at medical schools such as UCSF, and more broadly for the necessity of including behavioral and social scientists in the interdisciplinary study of health and well-being. The growing appreciation for the contribution of social and behavioral scientists to the understanding of health and illness is due in no small part to Susan's steady support and mentorship of junior researchers. Our aim in hosting this conference is to celebrate Susan's personal and professional contributions to the field, and we expect the talks today will serve as catalysts to stimulate excitement and interest in stress and coping research, and more broadly, in the role of psychology in studies of health and illness. Now, I would like to turn things over to our first panel facilitator. So Carolyn Aldwin is professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Sciences at Oregon State University. She received her doctorate from the University of California, San Francisco, go UCSF, in 1982, and was an NIMH postdoctoral scholar in human development, environmental demands, and health at the University of California, Irvine. She received a first award from the National Institute of Aging on psychosocial factors and health in aging early in her career at the Normative Aging Study, Boston's Veterans Administration, and has published over 90 articles and chapters in this area. She's a fellow of both Divisions 20, which is Adult Development and Aging of APA, and 38, which is Health Psychology, as well as the Gerontological Society of America. She's the author of 3 books, including Stress, Coping, and Development from Guilford, Health, Illness, and Optimal Aging from SAGE, and the Handbook of Health Psychology and Aging from Guilford Press. Turn it over to Carolyn. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Our way of coping with stress is to go hiking. So I've spent the last week or so in the Redwoods, and so my mind is there. So, but it's wonderful to be at this conference and to honor Susan. Our first talk is by Alex Zautra, and he is the Arizona State University Foundation Professor of Clinical Psychology. And Alex has been also just tremendously seminal in really pioneering daily diary studies in the context of arthritis, in showing positive and negative effects of social support. One of my very favorite of his findings was that the type of social support matters depending upon the stage of the illness. So if you're very tight and very pushy, it's terrible if you're not very sick. But when you're very sick, having a spouse that's very controlling is a very useful thing. And so without further ado, I will turn this over to Alex, and thank him for his talk.
I'm talking on resilience today, and best characterized by Madsen. First said this is an ordinary magic that's within people and situations and in communities. I'm speaking at a conference with someone who displayed extraordinary magic, Susan Folkman, and I'm really honored to be here to be able to speak on and really talk about a concept of resilience that's really both anticipated and informed by the brilliant work that Susan has done over the last several years. Let me begin by simply listing a group of collaborators, all of whom are contributing to what I say today. And some of them in 2005. This work is one that did certainly anticipate and inform the development of resilience, because in this, I think, landmark study of Susan and Richard Lazarus talked about how coping and adaptation are as valuable to study as the inners and outers of stressful experiences. And they talked about the distinctions between types of coping as well in this study. It's a marvelous piece of work, and it had begun the work of studying how people adapt to stress, not just how they feel when they are stressed. Now I want to just give you a couple of examples of how ubiquitous coping is, how resilience is just an ordinary experience built within and between people. Here's some examples from the Gulf and from Indonesia. Here's an example from, this is Gregory McDonald. He has ALS. He can only move his eyebrows. And yet he still communicates closely with his son. Here's another example from West Virginia. This, I think, displays that resilience goes across across the boundaries of life and death here, and these people are dying from lack of oxygen, being buried deep in a coal mine. And here they're still speaking to their loved ones, saying things, just tell them I'll see them on the other side. It wasn't so bad, I just went to sleep, and I love you. The reason for this, why? I mean, they're dying, they have no reason to communicate, yet they wish to just tell their loved ones that they can manage and cope, that they can be resilient even beyond this particular point. Here's my favorite, actually. This is a Lithuanian guy carrying a group of dictionaries over the border because the Soviets have outlawed the Lithuanian language. Since I'm Lithuanian, I kind of have a special for this. What people have begun to study is that the process by which people are able to manage life's difficulties are quite common. George Bonanno, for example, found that over half of the bereaved show very few signs of distress even after a month of losing a loved one. 1/3 of those who lost a loved one after 9/11 showed not one PTSD symptom. The capacities of people are underappreciated often in the study of stress, and yet it's certainly a quite common phenomenon among those people outside of our own research. Now, I want to give you a brief definition of what I mean by resilience. Others have other definitions, but in this case, we basically look at resilience as having two common features. One is a quick capacity to bounce back from emotionally and otherwise from stressful events. That is recovery rapid and full. And the second major feature of resilience is sustainability, to sustain positive engagements, to pursue and continue on life's purposes, even in the face of chronic difficulties. Resilience in the framework that we've developed here cuts across levels of adaptation, from restoration of homeostasis in the body to the preservation of quality in community life. I'm going to be talking about some of these features across this talk until I run out of time, okay? Because I don't want the music to start playing. One characteristic of people who are resilient and about the situations that allow people to be resilient is the presence of positive emotion. And this is another example of Susan's fortifying work when she began studying in this case, this positive psychological states and coping with severe stress. In another one of her papers, positive affect, and the other side of coping. I think Judy Moskowitz is on this paper as well. Now, the literature is now being filled with examples of how positive emotion plays a role in health and mental health. And I'm just going to give you a few to remind you of these. Many of these you already know. This is a study by Danner et al. In 2001 of the survivability or the life trajectories of nuns. And in this case, they analyzed the autobiographical essays that these nuns wrote before coming into the convent when they were in their 20s. And what they did was they analyzed a number of positive emotion sentences in those autobiographical essays, showing that that was correlated with the length of life of the nuns in their 80s, some up to their 90s. For example, many of you, I'm sure, already know Sheldon Cohen's work on negative and positive emotional style when they tried to give people colds by putting in their noses some infections, and then looked at the correlations between the presence of negative or positive emotional style on the percentages of those who developed colds, either by objective criteria, which is how much nasal congestion, or subjective criteria, how the people talked about themselves and feeling as if they were sick. Negative emotional style did not predict who got colds, what the percentage was of those who got colds, but positive emotional style did. Those with a higher rate of positive emotional expression displayed both objectively and subjectively reports of fewer colds I'm not sure Sheldon wanted this finding, but he got it anyway. Here's another example from Lisa Ferdman's work on people who've just had a hip fracture and then looking at them over a 24-month trajectory on their walking speed, looking at their positive affect, and also they charted high depressive symptoms in here, showing that those with greater positive affect recovered walking speed more rapidly and sustained it over time than those who did not. So these are just examples of one quality of life, positive emotion, separate from negative often, that predicts health and well-being over time. And I use these as examples because, well, it's kind of fun to show that it's not just the absence of distress that makes a difference in a person's life. So a cheerful heart is good medicine. Now, when we examine resilience capacities, and this is why stress and coping theory is so fundamental, the best way to examine it, or maybe the only way really to test it, is during stressful occasions. And we've done this in a number of ways, but the way we've most popularized it is through the study of everyday life. And in that way, we can chart who, over time, is best able to show capacity for resilience. And we can identify when those challenges occur, if we use daily diaries, and then look at the person's reactions day by day. And then, of course, the daily records also give us a window to modifiable factors in daily life, where we can make a difference for those experiencing pain, stress, and other challenges. So, for example, we'll give them a daily diary that includes questions about events in their lives with spouse and partner. Like a positive event was and is receiving a special gift. A negative, stressful event is arguing with spouse and partner. We analyze domains of spouse, partner, family, friends, and work as well. In each of those domains, we ask how stressful the relations were, but also we ask how enjoyable they were. And the correlation typically between ratings of stressfulness and enjoyableness is about a -0.4. Okay. So although they're negatively correlated, there's still a lot of room for being in both conditions every day. So we measure the ups and downs in daily life, and indeed, ups and downs are not described just on one continuum, but on two. These two are negatively correlated, but not perfectly. There's plenty of room to experience both negative and positive emotions, me being both delighted and stressed about this talk. People differ in the capacities for resilience, and they show different attributes about this. And these domains of resilience can be distinguished from those that we usually study in studying people's vulnerabilities. And this is a study by Bruce Smith and I, in which we factor analyzed personality or person attributes on the vulnerability side, anxiety, depression, pessimism, and other factors. On the resilience side, positive reinterpretation and growth, active coping, acceptance coping, purpose in life, and optimism. And we use these two factors to predict everyday life experiences like the daily diary events I just mentioned. And so when predicting negative social interactions, daily ones, we looked at vulnerability factor and resilience factor. There, the vulnerability factor predicted the number of interpersonal stressful events reported daily. In predicting positive social interactions, however, the resilience factor was the only factor that predicted those. So again, a separable set of domains, important to investigate both to understand how people are resilient and where they're in trouble in everyday life. So another way to examine people under stress is to pick populations that are in particularly stressful circumstances. In Susan's work studying people with HIV, for example, in our work, we study people with arthritis who have much chronic pain. And on a series of studies we've done, actually like the one I just mentioned on rheumatoid arthritis, to study people with a pro-inflammatory condition that leads to all the joints in the body, perhaps, to be inflamed from time to time, and to find those joints inflamed, often reactive to stressful circumstances. So in this study we called SARA, we're predicting a pro-inflammatory that's LPS stimulated across the laboratory conditions. Okay? we have baseline levels of stimulated IL-6. This pro-inflammatory condition is correlated with, we have changes in joint pain reported by the people across the laboratory condition, changes in stress. Now another factor that Howard Tenen introduced to our studies has been the study of depression, and in particular, a vulnerability factor is recurrent depression. So we had given all these people diagnostic tests beforehand, so we were able to examine and identify those with recurrent major depression. Both stress and recurrent depression didn't predict pro-inflammatory cytokine activity, but the interaction of the two, when those people with recurrent depression were stressed, show an increase in pro-inflammatory cytokine activity, which is correlated with the reports of joint pain. But the one other factor I want to introduce is changes in positive affect reported during the laboratory experience, showing a decrease in pro-inflammatory activity correlated with positive emotion. So, one of the things to keep in mind as we examine this is that affect itself, the study of emotion, is influenced by the conditions under which it's studied, so that stress itself influences the experience of emotion. Stress, as we say in our model, the dynamic model of affect, narrows the range of emotional experience for most people. Positive and negative affects are less differentiated during stress. And it's important to study emotional awareness, particularly as a way that can facilitate recovery from stress and also allow for greater sustainability of purpose for people who are chronically stressed by whether it's pain or interpersonal difficulties. So, for example, this graph shows stress and affect compression for people with rheumatoid arthritis, the same sample of people, showing that those reporting high levels of negative affect have a greater or steeper gradient of correlation between positive emotion and negative emotion, a higher inverse correlation between these two emotional experiences during stressful days. So, one question is, how do you manage for resilience in this population and other populations? And, you know, is the glass half empty or half full? And of course, it's really both. So, one approach we've taken, I think similar to the work here in San Francisco, is to introduce meditation as a method for people in chronic pain and experience stressful life. So, this is my favorite spot in Utah. And this is another way of depicting keeping the mind on the treadmill here. So we had three groups in this study. People got traditional pain management, cognitive behavior therapy. People got mindfulness meditation and emotion regulation. And then a third group that got the traditional arthritis education group, which served as our placebo control. So the components of emotional resilience here: awareness of complexity of emotion, acceptance of difficult emotions, and active regulation of our everyday emotions, a way of allowing the person to sustain a differentiation of emotion so they could continue to experience and accept and move forward with positive, engaging experiences even though in pain and stress. What did we find? Here's a quote from John Kabat-Zinn. That part of you that is aware is not itself in pain or ruled by these thoughts and feelings at all. So we found in particular that those with recurrent depression were helped the most by the mindfulness intervention. Here, the colored line I'm showing is the one with mindfulness meditation intervention for those with recurrent depression, showing an increase pre and post. We found the same sort of finding, and we also extended to a 6-month follow-up with vitality from the SF-36. One finding not yet published is that we found that the mindfulness groups were less reactive to interpersonal stressors on daily life than were either the CBT group or the education group. Here, by the way, we had daily diaries before and after the intervention, and so this shows during days of high interpersonal stress, how much negative affect they reported. And that gradient was less for those mindful, thinking that they were more protected, therefore more resilient in a sense. from that intervention. We also found findings which I'm less sure about, but I'll report them anyway for interest, because here is interleukin-6 stimulated again across a laboratory stress paradigm with periods 1, 2, and 3. And the bottom line, the red one there, is for the mindfulness group showing lower levels of pro-inflammatory cytokine. And particularly the difference really are at period 3, is after 2 stress inductions, showing less reactivity to those laboratory stressors. So these studies are supported by NIAMS, and they're continuing on. We're now looking at a group with another sort of chronic pain, fibromyalgia, which we think represents a condition of people who have trouble being resilient altogether by showing a relative deficit in their capacity for positive emotion. I have about 5 minutes left, all right, and so I'm going to be judicious in the rest of my slides. I want to mention the studies we're starting to do in the community now, studies funded by the National Institute on Aging, which in this study we look at parallel dimensions of risk and resilience with these variables studied in a community sample of residents middle-aged between ages of 40 and 65, and we want to be able to see who's able to maintain health over time. And we think we'll be able to identify some of the vulnerability factors that predict poor health, but also we expect an independent set of factors identifying who is resilient as well. And we've been able, interestingly enough, and we're really excited about this, to have applications of our concepts. And this one, a local foundation, St. Luke's Health Initiatives, identified resilience as their major theme. And so they've launched a $5 million program in funding nonprofit health organizations in the state in this program they called Resilience Health in a New Key, in which they use strength-based approaches to developing ways in which to promote health and strength among participants in the universities and communities there. So I've got a couple minutes left to say why community. Well, one is community. Social networks matter greatly to us. In this Framingham study, loneliness spreads across networks, but happiness also spreads across networks. And the type of network matters. And here's a network of a school district that's highly segregated. The whites with white and the blacks are green in this picture, and you see they don't mix well enough. And we need greater diversity, because diversity is, again, a factor that supports resilience. So there's a suburban US street that we think is non-resilient because it's pretty plain and nondescript. And here's a resilient neighborhood in Mumbai where there's multiple overlapping and redundant functions in that community. So we've started community gardening projects to study the development of more resilience in urban settings. And we're also begun to study social resilience in the armed forces, because indeed to prevent PTSD is a primary objective, and people, so soldiers, can be resilient as well if they develop adequate social networks. So adversity is effective eliciting talents in which prosperous circumstances would have lain dormant, says Horace, and Ralph Emanuel. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex, for a wonderful talk. Our second speaker today is Carsten Wrosch. He is Associate Professor of Psychology at Concordia University. One of the nice things about getting older is looking at generation issues and the transmission of knowledge and ideas across generations. And I think of Susan and Dick as being sort of the grandparent generation, the folks who started this, and then Tracy and I and Alex and others are sort of the parent generation. And we have now a third generation of researchers who are carrying on this tradition and taking our ideas in ways that we wouldn't have thought of. And that's always really nice to see. And Carsten is one of the leading lights, I think, in that third generation. He does some wonderful work combining aging with stress and coping, which is also makes me feel good, and has been looking a lot at primary and secondary control and how they change across the life course. But also, he'll be talking today on coping with unattainable goals.
I'm so glad that I can be part of this here today. It's such a great event. When Judy sent me the first email, I knew I want to be there. I have to be there, and our classes already started, but without me, because I really wanted to be here for this important event. I never had the chance to work with Susan because I was growing up in different research groups, and now I feel I missed the train somehow, and I will never have the opportunity. But definitely, the work that I'm doing has been influenced so much by Susan Falkman's work. What I will be talking here about is how, what can people do if life looks like that, if they can now further pursue important goals. And Susan Falkman's work from the very beginning when I started my dissertation some 12 years back in Berlin was so influential for my ways of thinking. And I remember that big pile of papers on my desk for 3 years that I had to read and go back and read and understand and go back again. So it's a great event. Let me say that this panel is about critical questions, and I want to answer 3 different questions here, or tell you a little bit about what our work shows. And one is about whether there are age effects for coping with unattainable goals, and Susan Falkman did some of the very early and first work on age effects with coping. And the second question is a little bit more defining what is goal adjustment, how can we adjust goals, and is it good for a person? Does it predict subjective well-being and physical health? And the third question is what are predictors of successful goal adjustment? How do people look like who are able to adjust to unattainable goals and to stay healthy and happy despite these constraints? Let me start by giving you a little bit of the theoretical background about our work. Much of the work that I'm doing now for 10 or 12 years is about the question whether there's anything good about quitting. And quitting has a bad reputation in the psychological literature, but also in culture at large. There are many theories that favor the value of persistence and basically argues that giving up can be equated with helplessness and depression. And in popular culture, for example, if you look at quotes from Benjamin Franklin, energy and persistence conquer all things, or Vince Lombardi, winners quit and winners never quit and quitters never win. That sort of has been the dominant value in Western cultures. And don't get me wrong, in American football, this is definitely true. But if you look at people's real lives, it may look a little bit more different. And I think there's no one who goes through a lifetime without having a goal or having an unattainable goal, something important in their lives that they can no further pursue. From a personality and health perspective, this is important because confronting constraints with respect to your goals, not being able to make further progress, elicits emotional distress. And emotional distress, in turn, can trigger biological dysregulation, can make people be more vulnerable to disease and eventually develop physical illness. And what's also important is there are feedback loops. If you're getting sick, you may face more constraints on your goals, so you're maybe entering into a downward spiral. based on the experience of unattainable goals. And from a coping and self-regulation perspective, it is important to note that this provides us with a tool that we can study how can we prevent this downward spiral from developing, and that may be the issue of adaptive self-regulation when people face unattainable goals. Just to give you a very brief idea about how we think about that, when people pursue their goals and they face difficulty with goal attainment, there are basically two different responses, and the adaptive value of these responses should depend on the opportunities for future success. If there are good opportunities, people should continue their effort and commitment towards the goals, should try to further attain their goals, which then leads to success with their goals, to supposedly higher levels of happiness and maintenance of physical health. However, if these opportunities are poor, continued persistence may lead to repeated failure, and people may have to disengage from the goal, may have to find new goals, new meaningful activities that they can pursue in life. And what's important here is if they do that, they also continue the engagement with important and meaningful goals. It's just different goals that they're pursuing then. So let me turn to my first question, age effects of coping. We started to study this model about opportunities and different modes of coping back in the 1990s when I did my dissertation in Berlin at the Max Planck Institute. And the main premise here was that there are age-related constraints and can make it easier, that can make it more difficult to attain personal goals when people get older. So basically in these studies we used age as a proxy for opportunity. And the idea was that coping that facilitates goal adjustment, such as positive reappraisals, for example, that they may contribute, that this sort of coping may contribute to subjective well-being in old age, while continued persistence may become less and less adaptive when people get older. Now, 10 years later, there are a number of studies that show support for this notion, and I just want to show you the results from one study that we published in Psych and Aging in 2000, where we looked at the adaptive value of persistence versus positive reappraisals across age groups with respect to associations with well-being. They're from a large national probability sample from the United States, 3,500 subjects. And what you see is, as people get older, the adaptive value of positive reappraisals increases and the adaptive value of persistence declines across age. So there are age effects of coping. Other coping mechanisms become more important as people get older. Let me come to the second question. I think that's important because so far I talked about different coping tactics, but this is not goal adjustment. It's not that positive reappraisals, other self-protective processes, it's not necessarily a goal adjustment. It may protect the emotions. So the question was, how can we define the adjustment of personal goals and then study the effects? And I did that starting in some 8-9 years ago when I did my postdoc in Vicky Helgeson's department at Carnegie Mellon University, working with Mike Shire. And what we did, we started defining goal adjustment, and we thought that there are two different processes involved. First, when people face an unattainable goal, they need to disengage from the unattainable goal, and in addition they need to find and engage into new meaningful activities. And we also defined the specific motivational components of goal disengagement and goal re-engagement. We thought that to disengage you need to withdraw both effort and commitment from the goal, and to re-engage in new goals you have to be able to identify new goals, you have to commit to these new goals, and you have to start pursuing these goals. And in terms of the adaptive effects here, the main benefit of goal disengagement is that it prevents accumulated failure experience when you face an unattainable goal. The main benefit of goal re-engagement is that it provides purpose for living. It gives you a new purpose where you can direct energy. I want to mention that there are secondary effects theoretically seen of these two modes of coping. Disengagement can provide resources for other activities. If you give up on a goal, you have more resources that you can invest. And re-engagement may reduce thoughts and feelings about failure. So if you have an unattainable goal, you do not necessarily disengage, but you do other new things that can reduce and override some of the negative emotions associated with blocked goals. In order to study this, we developed a short scale, the goal adjustment scale, 10 items, 4 items for goal disengagement, 6 items for goal re-engagement. And the two subscales are highly reliable, that's what the research shows, and only weakly correlated with each other. And we asked people to respond to these items with respect to the question, if I have to stop pursuing an important goal in my life. I want to say at this point, when we developed this scale, I was still very much influenced by contextual models of coping. And we started doing this research by asking people about different types of unattainable goals, to respond to the same items across different types of unattainable goals. And it turned out that there was high correlations between the different types of unattainable goals, and the effects were identical, leading to the conclusion that there may be something stable within a person, a tendency how people react when they face blocked goals that could influence adaptive outcome, which is a little different from contextual models of coping, that there may be something stable, something a little bit more dispositional that people apply across different situations. And that's what this goal adjustment scale is measuring people's general goal adjustment capacities. Short summary of studies that have been done over the past 6-7 years with respect to this construct, and they are not only done by ourselves, also by other researchers. With respect to subjective well-being, there is, we find, or other people also find, differential effects. What that means is that being able to disengage from unattainable goal seems to reduce negative aspects of subjective well-being, like negative affect, and being able to find, re-engage in new goals increases positive aspects of subjective well-being associated with purpose and positive emotions. And most of the studies, they're cross-sectional and longitudinal studies, show that goal re-engagement does not predict negative affect, and goal disengagement does not predict positive affect. There are some inconsistencies. For example, if you look at perceived stress, you find benefits from both capacities, but I have to, or you know that probably, measures like Sheldon-Cohen's perceived stress scale are sort of a hybrid. They include positive and negative items, like I feel stressed and I feel on top of things. So given that, it's not very surprising that you find effects of both measures. So a summary about physical health becomes much more clear. The studies, longitudinal and cross-sectional studies, show that people who are able to give up on unattainable goals, that they report fewer health symptoms, they have more efficient sleep, they have lower cortisol level, and they have better immune functioning. And there are no health effects as main effects so far from goal re-engagement. I want to show you a little bit data about these studies. I did the study at Concordia University when I started looking at students across one semester, and those of you who have much contact with students probably had the experience that across the semester negative emotions increase among students, and that's what we found, but not for everyone. Those who were able to disengage from unattainable goals, they did not show this increase in negative emotions over time. Then we predicted health problems at the end of the semester, and we found the same effects of goal disengagement for the occurrence of health problems at the end of the semester, health problems like diarrhea, constipation, migraine, headaches. Those students who had difficulty disengaging, they showed these health problems, and they also had much less efficient sleep. Finally, what is very important, or what is most important for me with respect to this, now if we ran some mediation analysis, the changes in negative emotions that I just showed you totally explains these effects, which makes them consistent with the theoretical model. Goal disengagement prevents negative emotions, and that may be associated with physical health problems. So next question here was, how can these health effects, physical health effects occur? What are the mediators? And we looked into biological functioning, and we found very similar results. For example, in an adult sample looking at diurnal cortisol across different days, we found that the capacity to disengage was related to reduced cortisol level. Those people who had difficulty disengaging reported higher cortisol level, which is the red line. And what's interesting here is the higher cortisol level were during the day, not early in the morning, when people get up, take a shower, brush their teeth. It's later in the day, probably, when people try to achieve the goals that they set out to achieve, and they may face constraints. And then goal adjustment capacities, in particular disengagement, matter later in the day. Final slide about this sort of studies. We looked into immune functioning, C-reactive protein, and sample of adolescents, longitudinal study over a little bit more than 1 year, and we found that the capacity to disengage was associated with longitudinal changes in C-reactive protein. Those who had difficulty disengaging showed twice as much increase over time in this marker of systemic inflammation as compared to those who were average, and those who were able to disengage did not show any increase over time in markers of systemic inflammation. Now, to the extent that high and persistent levels of C-reactive protein may contribute or put people at risk of developing physical health problems down the road, like heart problems, these adolescents may be at risk of potentially becoming sick, not over the next year or two, but maybe in 20, 30, 40 years, if these high levels of systemic inflammations are being maintained. So putting that together is, if we look at goal disengagement and goal re-engagement, what these data show is disengagement reduces negative aspects of well-being, re-engagement increases positive aspects of well-being, and the effects on negative emotions seem to influence biological functioning and physical health. I know that other people find effects of positive emotions on physical health. I'm aware of that. All the data I have collected, I never found that. And my explanation here is that high levels of negative affect take a greater toll on biological indicators and biological dysregulation and physical health as compared to low levels of positive emotions. And reviews in this area, like by Sarah Pressman and Sheldon Cohn, sort of show that positive emotions can do everything. They can be good for your health, they can be bad for your health, they can show no effects on your health. It's a very complicated literature. I think the literature on negative affect is much more straightforward. Last question that I want to address here: what predicts goal adjustment? That is important because there are these reliable individual differences in people's capacities. And we want to find out the predictors on that may also have some clinical implications, how we can make it easier for people to adjust. Some research and theory in this area, and there are only very few studies to my knowledge, suggest that other personality factors facilitate disengagement. For example, the work by Lisa Aspinwall showed that optimists disengage faster from unsolvable problems when there are alternatives present in their environment. In addition, there are theories that show that self-protective coping, like downward social comparisons, external attributions, positive reappraisals, that they may make it easier for a person to accept that a certain goal can no longer be attained. There's not so much data on that point, but at least there is a theory. What I want to show you here during the last 5 minutes is is some of our recent work on that issue about the possibility that depressive mood itself can make it easier to give up on unattainable goals. So there may not be only something good about quitting, there may also be something good about depressive symptoms. Why? Because it makes it easier to quit. It's not my theory. I didn't develop this line of thinking all by myself. There's theory from personality and evolutionary psychology that makes exactly that argument. Randy Nesse, University of Michigan, is looking at the evolutionary origin of mood for a long time, and he suggested that depressive mood may have evolved in humans to cope with such situations that are related to danger, loss, or wasted effort that require disengagement. And some almost 40 years or 35 years ago, Eric Klinger, who in my opinion, wrote a landmark paper about these issues, about the depression disengagement cycle. He suggested that when people face difficulties, they try to overcome the difficulty. If that is not successful, he suggested that depressive mood kicks in, makes it easier for a person to let go of the incentive. So it's all has all been written 35 years ago. While it's often very difficult to test evolutionary hypotheses, this left us here with a testable hypothesis. We could look into longitudinal research. Do depressive symptoms make it easier to adjust to unattainable goals? And does this increase in goal adjustment capacities then predicts reduced depression down the road? And we looked at this in a longitudinal sample of adolescent girls, 4 waves of data. When we analyzed this first 3 waves of data and we predicted changes in goal disengagement capacities by baseline levels of depressive symptoms using the back depression inventory, we found that there was an increase in goal disengagement capacities, but only among those who showed high levels of depression at baseline. So that would sort of support the hypothesis, but we don't know yet whether it's adaptive. So what we did in turn then, we created some scores about how much did the goal disengagement capacities increase for each subject, and we subjected those scores into a regression analysis predicting depressive symptoms at 19 months, so at wave 4. What did these analyses show? So we predicted T4 depressive symptoms, and we controlled for all depressive symptoms experienced previously. And the results showed that change in goal disengagement capacities were associated with depressive symptoms 6 months down the road. So those who increased their goal disengagement capacities, they showed less depressive symptoms 6 months later. Putting that together, these results are consistent with the idea that depressive symptoms, depressive mood itself can make it easier to adjust to unattainable goals, which in turn reduces depressive symptomatology down the road. So let me summarize here with respect to what I've presented with respect to the 3 questions. Yes, there are age effects of coping. As people advance in age, they benefit from coping that supports goal adjustment, such as positive reappraisals. There are other studies about external attributions, about downward social comparisons. They show all pretty much the same pattern of findings. When it comes to a clear definition of what goal adjustment is, my answer would be it involves goal disengagement, it involves goal re-engagement, and above and beyond the specific reactions to events that people show, there may be something stable, some tendencies within a person that people apply in certain situations with what we call goal adjustment capacities. And in this regard, goal disengagement capacities are beneficial for a person's health by reducing the negative emotions. Goal re-engagement capacities increase positive aspects of subjective well-being. We didn't really show health effects. We are still looking for them. Maybe they show up a little later in our longitudinal studies. Finally, goal adjustment can develop in adolescence as a function of depressive symptomatology. So there are these reciprocal associations between motivation and emotions, which I find particularly interesting. My final slide is about what needs to be done with respect to this area of research, and what do we need to do with respect to these questions. I think we have to examine these reciprocal effects between emotion and motivation across the entire lifespan. These effects may be specific to adolescence. They may not translate into old age. We need to comprehensively identify predictors of goal adjustment, in particular goal re-engagement. And finally, we have to examine more comprehensively the biopsychological pathways to physical health. 30 seconds about this issue because I'm out of time. What I have experienced when I got into the area of health psychology is that many of the theoretical associations do not really map the data. For example, there are many studies who don't show that cortisol really is associated with health outcomes. What we do in our laboratory now is looking at interactions between biology and personality, and we find that personality processes, adaptive ones, including coping, can buffer effects of high cortisol and physical health in regard to what I would call clinical significance. And I think that research along these lines is very important for the future of the field of coping, because it shows the importance of coping processes. Thank you.